In this video we're going to look at the Pythagorean Theorem, discovered by a guy named Pythagoras. And this tells us that there's a relationship between the squares of the sides of the triangle and the square of the hypotenuse. A couple things to keep in mind when using this is that we will use this theorem only with right-angled triangles. And we need to know at least two of the sides to make it work. We do not actually use angles in this formula, it is just the sides. So a few things to remind ourselves of. One of them is how to actually recognize which sides of the triangle go to which part of the formula. So across from the right angle is what we call the hypotenuse, or the long side. Across from the right angle is always going to be the longest side of a right angle triangle. And the other sides that we have are the short sides then. They're not the same size necessarily, but they are shorter than the hypotenuse. And in relationship to our formula, that's what we see happen. We've got short squared plus short squared equals long squared. So we could call this side A, this side B, and that side C, where the long side is the C, and the two short sides we call A and B. And it doesn't matter which side we put the A or the B on. I could have, in fact, put the A over here and the B over there. It won't really matter to us. So two versions of this formula can be arranged, and I'll just put them down so that they're easy to get at for you. So the first version would be to find the long side. And in this case, we're going to have C is equal to the square root of A squared plus B squared, or short side plus short side. So to find the long side of the triangle, you're going to use an addition. And the next formula that we're going to look at would then be to find the short side. And when we rearrange the original A squared plus B squared equals C squared to find a short side, we get A is equal to the square root of C squared minus B squared. Now keep in mind, that's always the long side squared minus the short squared, and it's a minus in there. In this case, it's the short squared plus the short squared. And one thing that might be helpful for you if you're using your calculator is to remember that you need to put brackets around these things if you're taking the square root of the whole function. So it's square root bracket A squared plus B squared bracket. Okay, so we can use either of these formula to solve for the short or long sides of the triangles. So as two examples for us, in this case, the first thing we want to look at is that we've got an unknown here, and it is the x, and that happens to be on the long side of the triangle. So when we're trying to find the long side of the triangle, we're going to use the formula where we add the two together. So we might say x, being the long side, is equal to the square root bracket 5 squared plus 12 squared bracket, because 5 squared plus 12 squared is the short side plus the short side, and both of those squared. Taking the square root of the whole thing will give us the long side. So in this case, 5 squared plus 12 squared, taking the square root, we get 13. And the next example, here we're looking for x, but it's actually the short side of the triangle. So when we're solving for x in this case, we want to use the short side formula, so it's got a minus sign. And we want to remember that we always start with the long side. So we're going to have bracket 17 squared, and because we've had to rearrange it with some subtraction, it's minus 15 squared with a bracket. So again, the short side over here is going to be 17 squared minus 15 squared, and that will give us a short side, which in this case happens to be 8. So to use the Pythagorean theorem, you just need to remember whether you're solving for the short side or the long side. Don't forget to use your brackets with your calculator so you don't get any typos. And for the long side, it's always the short squared plus the short squared under square root in brackets. And for our short side, it's always going to be the long side squared minus the short side squared, all underneath a square root sign.